Blessings of the Triple Gem, Teruan Saranai. Welcome back to another weekly slow session of our Metta Lab. So today our plan is to continue with the Karaniyametta Sutta and to actually finish it today. So let's begin by paying homage to the Triple Gem. We can bow our heads in Anjali. Homage to the Buddha, homage to the Dhamma, and homage to the Noble Sangha. So as you know, we are developing metta through a series of sutta meditations. So we are at the moment at the first one, which is developing metta based on the Karaniyametta Sutta. So we're going to finish that off today. And then next week, we're going to be starting to look at the first doorway to Nibbana, or painful practice with slow realization. It deepens our practice of metta. So it's a very good meditation to build on from Karaniyametta Sutta. And then from there, after we finish that, we'll be looking at metta with 7 enlightenment factors or bojjhangas, as well as liberation of mind by loving kindness. So let's continue with Karaniyametta Sutta. This week, I'd like to, instead of recapping, I'd like to finish off the sutta, and then I'd like to recap the whole thing, and then we'll do a meditation, and then I'll give some introduction or a bit of a heads up about what we'll be starting next week. So let's start with our opening, which is usual, how to get the best out of this session. So there might be some new people who haven't heard this before, but it's always good for all of us to be able to look at this. So the first one is to keep an open mind. So when we do this session, it's very good to come to the Dhamma fresh. We listen to the Buddha's words fresh. So we do the sutta meditation from start to finish. So this is an example of that. Over a number of weeks, we're coming to the end of the Karaniyametta Sutta. And you will see, or have seen, that we're really trying to understand the meaning behind Buddha's words, and also the miracle of his instruction, that if we follow these insight pathways, gradually step by step building them, we actually learn to penetrate the Dhamma, to connect maybe things that we've learned before with what we're doing now, but definitely how to develop and cultivate and spread loving kindness in an immeasurable way. So one of the things we always say is we need to give up those unskilled states in order to develop the skilled ones. So we do the noble washing. So that's part of this, keeping an open mind to that. And also it's good to think, maybe I have some of these unskilled states. Let me investigate and look and see. And if there is, let me clean that. The second is be okay with not understanding everything. So we keep saying this is a gradual practice. We chip away at unskilled states in order to be able to develop the skilled states. So we gradually train and we gradually make progress. So that is what I'm hoping has been happening as you've followed along. And each session there might be new suttas, different Pali words. So be okay with whatever is possible that you pick up. Even a little insight, a little word, just a deeper meaning of one aspect of what Buddha is saying. Whatever that is, be happy with that. That's progress. And especially if we're growing in wholesome qualities, Buddha would say we are making progress. And then remember that we're all learners. We come together to lean on each other, to make that right effort, and to walk the path together. And then when we meditate at the end, it's a case of being able to give ourselves the chance to practice together, give ourselves the chance to clean the mind, calm it down, concentrate it, and then develop it, uplift it, and in this case with loving kindness, with metta. So take a temperature or gauge what the mind is right now coming into this session. Is it heavy? Is it happy? Is it tired? Is it angry? Or whatever it is, just check what it is right now. And by the end of the session, check again and see whether the mind has changed, whether it's lifted, whether it's been cleaned and there's more wholesome qualities in the mind. And again, this session is to put down our responsibilities, take a bit of viveka in order to meditate together and make sure we understand what the Buddha is saying. And when we meditate, again, the prompts are always to use our own examples. That's how we connect with the Dhamma. It's not to feel bad or guilty about having done wrongdoing. It's to clean it and then to go beyond that. And also it's not there to also point the finger at other people, which is what we are prone to do. It's so much easier to see it in other people, but that's not the point of the practice. The point of the practice is actually to develop loving kindness in this case, and also to look inward. So happiness, what the Buddha is calling as happiness, is to be found inward. So inside of us rather than externally. And same with the unhappiness as well, not to go looking for that outside. And then lastly, to have good wishes for everybody that's helped us up until this point, and everybody who's joining in the session today. Wish everyone well. So this is the insight pathway that we've been following. So last week we got up to with anger or ill will, one should not wish another to suffer. So we have gone through the whole of all these verses up to this point. And we have been cleaning the mind at the outset. So a lot of the beginning part of the meditation is about noble washing, about the core qualities that we need in order to develop metta, and then being able to start to wish by correcting our view all the way through. Buddha last week when we went through it, he was getting us to contemplate all living beings and going through sets of living beings in all realms of existence, and then coming to what are we still holding on to. So if you remember, metta is the antidote, the medicine for anger or ill will. And so throughout this, even at the front, when we started to look at easy to instruct, we were already starting to address anger issues, because when we have derogation, disparaging, envy, stinginess, the root of those things actually goes back to anger, ill will, things like that. And so when we come to what we did last week, we're actually also looking at it in a much more deeper sense, if you remember. So this week, we're going to finish the sutta, and we're going to go through all this other bit of instruction, but we're going to also focus primarily to make sure we conclude our insight pathway to understand what is it we meditate on when we come to the end of the meditation. So as we've said, Noble Eightfold Path is what we activate, both loving kindness as well as the Noble Eightfold Path. They're rooted in non-greed, non-hatred, non-delusion. So when we go about our daily lives, more often than not, we are rooted in greed, hatred, and delusion. That's the conditioning we construct out of greed, hatred, and delusion. In our meditation, this is our primary ability to be able to walk something different, something that's rooted in non-greed, non-hatred, non-delusion. That's the easiest part of it, given that we have very busy lives and lots of responsibilities. So we've been through this before, and I will refer to it again, because the establishing of the right view leads to the rest of the path unfolding. And so when we get to practice loving kindness, knowing this insight pathway, one gets to right concentration, having the right view, and all the other path factors. So let's continue. So the next verse says, Mātā yatang niyang putang, a mother would guard her own child, ayusa eka puta manurake, her one and only child with her own life. Evampi sabba bhutesu manasang bhavaye aparimanang. Even so, towards all living beings, let one cultivate an intention that is immeasurable. So let's first look at the first two lines. So here the Buddha is really giving us an example that he wants us to have in our mind when we're actually developing loving kindness. So the Buddha gives us this example of a mother guarding or protecting her one and only child. So our question is, where is the Buddha coming from by giving this example? And so we're talking about a mother who, if there's any danger, she would physically put her body in front or over the child in order to protect the child. Also, in terms of that, if there was danger in the water, she would just simply jump into the water to try and save her child. Likewise, through physical actions, she would feed her child the best that she can feed the child. She would give things that are safe to play with, safe to use. She wouldn't harm the child. So what we want to realize with this is that she wouldn't do anything that would harm, which would make bad things happen to the child. And so when you think about it that way, she's really having physical actions that are purified. So she has purified conduct towards her child. The other thing would be when she speaks to the child, she would use loving words, kind words, gentle words. So a mother to a child that the Buddha is talking about is not someone who would use lies, harsh speech, divisive speech, or any of those things. And therefore, she would have purified verbal conduct towards her child. And then when you think about her mental conduct, when she thinks of her child, it would be for the child's well-being, like having good wishes to the child. May the child prosper, sleep well, be safe, eat and go about its daily life with ease. So she wouldn't wish harm in her mind to the child. She wouldn't wish anything bad or untoward to come towards the child. And so in that way, she has purified mental conduct towards her child. So that's what Buddha wants us to reflect on, that the example that he gives of a mother to a child is one who has purified physical, verbal, and mental conduct. So she wants no harm to come to the child. None of the things like killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, the kinds of wrong speech, or anything in the mind that would harm. So it's important when we reflect on that. Some people think, oh, but I've seen mothers who are not like that. It's important to remember that this is not the example that Buddha's giving, and we're not meant to try and connect it in that way. We're actually meant to connect it to see what Buddha would mean, what he would want us to reflect on in order to understand how we are supposed to cultivate and spread metta. So Buddha is really saying we must spread metta, loving kindness, to all living beings in all realms of existence with purified physical, verbal, and mental conduct, just like this mother. And so that's how we need to do it. Now, if we have children, then that's what we would do towards our children in this kind of case. And if one does that to one's own child in that way, if you have a child, then Buddha is saying we must do that to all other people in the world, all other living beings in the world. So our neighbors children, the animals, the politicians, all our colleagues at work, our bosses, all kinds of people, whether they're from a different religion, whether they're from a different family. So it's something to reflect on here, that it's to one and all the same. So that means with purified physical conduct, we wouldn't want to harm our own child. Likewise, we wouldn't want to harm or kill or steal from another person. Likewise, with our verbal conduct, we wouldn't shout at our child with loving kindness. We wouldn't do that. So likewise, we wouldn't do that to anybody else in the world, whether it's a dog, a cat, a politician. That's the emphasis that Buddha's giving. And same with the mind, that we wouldn't have ill will towards our child. So likewise, it's not to have ill will to anybody else in the world. So it's a very high practice. So where we got to last week was being able to remove anger and ill will. And at the start of our meditation, many weeks back, we were talking about having the purified physical and verbal conduct. And we've been cleaning mentally as well. So you can see by the time we get to this point, and we haven't finished the meditation yet, but up until this point, Buddha is actually really showing how do you spread metta? What's the mind state? What are the qualities that one has, the core qualities at the physical level, at the verbal level, and at the mental level? So it's no small thing. And so when you think about it that way, you really connect it with what we did at step number 9, which is not yearning to associate with families or groups, this kulesu ananugido step in Pali. It plays a very important role here because when we've given up taking certain families or groups as me and mine, our attachment to them, we say we're not going to have this attachment, this longing, this greed for them, then it's possible to spread metta, loving kindness in this way, because we've actually let go of me and my family and groups. So when you think about families, there are families of insects, there's families of animals, different animals, there's families of even politicians, there's families in all kinds of different religions, there's families of people with differing views. So when you think about if we haven't let go of attachment, to certain families or groups, whether it's sports teams, countries, religions, genders, sexual orientation, whatever the case may be, then it's not possible to be like this mother who would guard her own child, because we would be blocked. So we would exclude, okay, I don't like that particular political group, so I've excluded all of them. And therefore, certain misconduct would re-enter into that. So it's very good to, again, reflect on step number 9, that we're not yearning to associate with families or groups. So we don't think of just me and mine, me and the people I like, me and the people that I prefer, me and the people that support my opinions. It's not that. Otherwise, we don't have immeasurable loving kindness. Because if you see, it's towards all living beings, let one cultivate an intention that is immeasurable. So it's not immeasurable if we say, but not that group, and not that group, and not those people, and not those particular animals or insects or divine beings or whoever it may be. It wouldn't be immeasurable because we put a block there. So this is how we make sure that we maintain the right view that we developed at step number 9. Then the Buddha says, Metancha sabba loka samim, and let one cultivate to the entire world, manasang bhavaye aparimanang, an intention of loving kindness that is immeasurable. So he repeats that again. Udang ado chatiriyancha, upward, downward, and across, and asambadang averang asapatang, without obstruction, hatred, nor hostility. So Buddha is saying that we need to spread this immeasurable loving kindness upwards. So udang, this is towards the pure abodes and formless realms. So that's the highest of all realms of existence. And then downward would be the human realm. Across would be all the things, all the other realms of existence. So that's in all directions. That's what Buddha is saying. In all directions, all realms of existence. So our intention here is to cultivate immeasurable loving kindness to all living beings. And he says in that last line of the verse, without obstruction. So this is asambadang, meaning we don't have any blocks. We don't have any obstructions to prevent that. So that's confirming that our right view is in place, not me and mine. That's what makes this possible. And it says without hatred. So averang, or without enmity, meaning there's no hate. So in the previous steps, we were removing no anger, no ill will. So that's what makes that possible. And then when it says free of hostility, asapatang, meaning we're not holding on to any grudges. We're not holding on to any labels against people. We've removed that. And when that's the case, then our meditation can go in all directions boundlessly. So when we spread metta in all directions, without obstruction, without hate, then it becomes immeasurable. And so we realize it's only the wrong view. And only when hate and hostility comes back in that we're not able to do it immeasurably. And so that's why Buddha, if you look at this meditation, Buddha gives us step by step, gradually, each word, each instruction, very carefully to purify ourselves, to make sure that our physical, verbal, and mental conduct is slowly purified. So then we come to Titang charang nisonowa, whether standing, walking, sitting, sayanowa, yawa tassa vikata middo, or lying down, or as long as one is free of drowsiness. Etang sating aditeya, one resolves to remember that or be mindful of. Brahma mettang viharang idamahu. They have said in this existence, this is a divine abode. So clearly we can do this meditation in any posture. So standing, walking, sitting, lying down. The only proviso that the Buddha gives is that we must be free of drowsiness. And so that means that we don't have hindrances such as sloth and torpor. Dhinamitta in Pali. So if we don't allow greed or hatred to come back into our meditation, then what will happen is that we'll be free of drowsiness. So we don't have sensual desire or ill will. So remember when we were saying if we are unrestrained with our sense faculties, uncontrolled, if we let them go roaming, that's where the defilements come back in. If the defilements come back in, then we slip back into drowsiness. So it's very important that whatever posture one uses, and probably the one that is most dangerous is always the lying down. The lying down because the body gets very relaxed and then it can slip into drowsiness just because of maybe tiredness or things like that. So it's important that if you know that you're tired, then you pick a different posture in order to make sure that one is free of drowsiness. And even not to overeat, to have moderation in eating is very helpful because that's the other way that one slips into drowsiness. The other thing that Buddha says is when we sit in a particular way, like we slouch or fidget, then we're also prone to drowsiness. So the posture of the body, being upright, sitting upright or standing upright, or when one lies down, that one's not too tired and has a certain level of alertness. So if so, then it says we must remember or we're mindful that this is a divine abode, Brahmamettang. So Brahmamettang can also be divine living or divine dwelling. So divine is reference to the Brahmas, those who have developed to a higher state of existence. And so what is this divine abode that Buddha is referring to? And what he's referring to is that we want to dwell or live, cultivating, spreading metta with purified physical, verbal, and mental actions. That's what we need to remember. That's what we need to be mindful of. So even if, while we're sitting, cultivating loving kindness, even if an ant comes to bite us, rather than killing the ant, what we would do is to refrain from that, because if one has purified physical actions, one doesn't kill. Likewise, if someone interrupts our meditation, calls on us to do something, we don't have harsh words with that person. So when one remembers that the divine abode, the divine dwelling, when one's cultivating loving kindness, you don't break that. You don't break the physical conduct, verbal conduct, mental conduct that one has cultivated. So we've washed it, we don't go backwards, we don't backslide. And so that's what the divine abode is, that it's important to remember that Brahmas, divine beings, they dwell or abide in the Brahma realm. And they've got to the Brahma realm, been reborn to the Brahma realm because they have these kinds of mind states and these kinds of purified conduct. So it's helpful to revisit this sutta that we used during one of our sessions. And this is the Dhatu So Sandhana Sutta. And if you remember, the Buddha was talking about like elements. So the Buddha said, because it is according to like elements that beings associate with each other and come together. Beings of low disposition associate and come together with beings of low disposition. Beings of good disposition associate and come together with beings of good disposition. It was so in the past, it will be so in the future, and it is so in the present. So I won't read the rest of that, but it's helpful to connect with Buddha's instructions in this Karaniyametta Sutta, that as a minimum, this is a pathway. If we follow the instructions of Karaniyametta Sutta, it's a pathway to go with the Brahmas, to be reborn to the divine abode as a minimum. Because what we cultivate when we train in the Karaniyametta Sutta is the same kind of conduct that they have trained in and how they were reborn to those realms. So Buddha is basically saying like goes with like. So connect with that Dhamma just for a few moments. So we come to the last verse. And in this last verse, the Buddha says, Ditincha anupagamma, not taking up any view. Silava dasanena sampanno, virtuous and endowed with insight. Kamesu vinaya geddang, having removed greed for sensual pleasures. Nahi jatu gabbaseyang punaretiti, one certainly would not come again to conceive in a womb. So we're coming to the real pointy end of the meditation, the real insight that comes from this meditation, and we've been building up towards it. And so when we come to this last verse, we're really looking at the final steps in our meditation. So the first part is not taking up wrong views, virtuous. So we've cultivated right view up to this point in the meditation. So from the start of the meditation, we cultivated that we wanted to be upright. So if I just go to the next slide. When we cultivated at the start of the meditation being upright, we looked at our physical and verbal conduct. So that means that we've purified both those aspects. So we are no longer killing living beings, we're not taking what is not given or stealing, we're not undertaking sexual misconduct, we're not doing divisive speech, harsh speech, frivolous speech. I think there's one missing here, which is lying. So the false speech should be somewhere here, but it's somehow missing, but it's meant to be there. And by the time we got to that we would have been upright, then after that, so that's 7 skilled states. Now, when we purified some more of our mental states, we gave up derogation, envy, disparaging, and stinginess. We also gave up the harshness or the rudeness in order to become gentle. And we also gave up arrogance to become non-arrogant or humble. We also gave up the impoliteness or discourteousness in order to become courteous. And we gave up yearning to associate with families or groups. And so that's where we fulfilled the right view. So not me and mine, in order to cultivate this immeasurable loving kindness. And then we gave up the anger and ill will. And so that fulfilled the skilled state of non-ill will. So we have 9 skilled states. So on here it looks like 8, but it's actually 9 skilled states. And so these are our physical, verbal, and mental conduct that we've purified. And that's what makes us virtuous. So when it says not taking up wrong views, virtuous. This is what makes us virtuous. But it's not complete, because if you can see at the bottom, we haven't given up covetousness in order to become non-covetous. So out of the 10 skilled states, we still need to give up covetousness, meaning we have to give up greed in order to fulfill non-greed. So if we go back to the verse, when the Buddha tells us, having removed greed for sensual pleasures, this is the Buddha pointing out we need to give up greed for sensual pleasures, because if we don't give up greed for sensual pleasures, this is the problem. Greed for sensual pleasures is what we covet. So kamesu geddang instead of kamesu vinaya geddang, we haven't removed it. When you look at greed for sensual pleasures, another way of saying it is we're attached to sensuality. We're attached to sensual objects. It could be the food, it could be people, it could be material objects. Whatever we direct our sense spheres towards. So that is why we still have covetousness, this abijja, and that's rooted in this greed. So if we have developed any insight in this meditation, particularly at step 6, when we looked at we must control our sense faculties, then what we realize is that we keep searching, like being born, and then we're subject to aging, sickness, and death, and also defilements. That's our conditioning out of ignorance and craving. But what happens is when we don't have wisdom, which is step number 7, and if we're uncontrolled and we're not wise, we're foolish, we keep going out searching for the same things. We keep searching for what is subject to aging, sickness, and death, and also defilement. We do the ignoble search. And so that keeps us bound to this whole mass of suffering. Now, when we look at the Samadhi Bhavana Sutta, this is what we looked at when we looked at step number 6, and we come back to it because this is where the insight comes from. So if you remember this Samadhi Bhavana Sutta, when you look at the arising part, the beginning part, we go towards these things because we think it's pleasurable. But by the end of the insight pathway for the Samadhi Bhavana Sutta, we realize actually it's attached to this whole mass of suffering. So if you remember, this is the big picture, that fleeting pleasure in the big picture sense is bound to suffering. So we could be greedy for food, our most favorite food in the whole entire world, and we haven't given it up. We haven't seen that the attachment or craving towards it is what keeps us bound to suffering. So we would seek delight, abhinandati, welcome, abhivadati, remain holding, ajosaya titati. If that is the case, then there's delight. If there's delight, there's clinging, so it's stronger. If there's clinging, we seek existence. How do we do that? We put money into the box that says, I value my favorite food, so I would like a tongue, an eye, a ear, a nose, a tongue, a whole body in order to experience that again. And that kind of existence would need to be a sensual realm, one of the sensual realms of existence. And so at the point of death, with the breakup of the body, if there's enough money in the money box, one births. It doesn't necessarily mean that one would get a human birth, but one births. And when one births, then what happens is we're subject to aging and death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, sadness, and despair. So that's the predicament. That's our predicament. So if we're greedy for food, for that little bit of taste, we're bound to suffering. If we're greedy for our own body, thinking, oh, our body is great. It doesn't matter if it ages or gets sick. It doesn't matter. I'm not worried about death. But yet we cling to the body at the point of death, then the same thing again, bound to suffering. If we're greedy for another family member, if we're greedy for or very attached to some kind of material object, we run the same recipe that the Buddha has given us, this dependent origination, or an aspect of it. So what happens is in this process of going down this path, the wrong view kicks in. Because the wrong view is saying, I value that. And what do we say throughout this meditation? Don't value the wrong things, the things that keep us bound to suffering, the things that we are misapprehending. And part of that is when we misapprehend, we really need to see that these things that we cling to, they're subject to change, they're unlasting, therefore suffering or dukkha, and it's not worth taking as me and mine. That's the crux of this. This whole meditation is built up on a sense of it's worth it, but it's actually not worth it. And this is what Buddha is pointing to in this meditation. Because when we cling like that, we're saying, I want to be born back into this kind of family or group. I want to be born for this kind of existence. So if one seeks delight in being born in a particular country with a particular family, you run this same recipe and it ends up in suffering. So it's really important to really see we misapprehend out of ignorance and out of craving, out of these attachments. We value the wrong things and we remain bound to dukkha. So we really need to see this. This is the insight in Karaniyametta Sutta, that this is the insight that the Buddha says we must be endowed with, that it's not what we thought. We've misapprehended it. It's subject to change, impermanent, suffering, not to be taken as me and mine. So this is the reason when you see this, when you take your examples and you see this, you realize, let me give up the greed. Let me give up this wanting, this longing for something that I know is flawed, is deceptive to me. So that's how we give up the covetousness. And then if we give up the covetousness, then we have that final skilled state, the non-covetousness. So what we need to see is that over many lifetimes, countless lifetimes, we valued the wrong things. We valued the sensory experiences that keep us bound to transmigrate, going from birth to birth in samsara. And so there's no end to suffering if we don't break that. There's a sutta called Pathama Bhava Sutta, and it's in Anguttara Nikaya chapter 3, and it's discourse number 76. And Venerable Ananda asked the Buddha about existence, about this bhava. And in his response, the Buddha taught that the sense sphere existence, so the karma bubble, Buddha was saying this is an inferior existence. And then he said that the form sphere, so the rupa bubble, that's a middling state of existence, majjhimaya. And then the formless sphere, the arupa bubble, the Buddha was saying is a superior state of existence, panittaya. So when you look at very much for the Karaniyametta Sutta, when we're stuck in wanting an existence, the Buddha is saying, definitely don't go for the inferior realm. So he means the sensual realm, the karma bubble, and that includes all the karma loka, so all the lower realms, the human realm and the 6 heavenly realms. Those are the ones that the Buddha says is inferior. And then when he talks about the form sphere, the rupa bubble, he's talking about rupa loka. He's talking about all the ones where if one has developed the jhanas, then one can be reborn into those realms of existence according to the jhanas. And of course, arupas, the formless or the less material realms, those are the ones where one has developed space is infinite, infinite consciousness, emptiness or nothingness, and neither perception or non-perception. So at the point of death is if one has those attainments, one can be reborn according to those realms. And of course, Buddha would say if one has the ability to develop beyond any of those existences, because true safety is Nibbana. But for the purposes of understanding existence, it's very clear in the Karaniyametta Sutta, particularly when we get to the last 2 lines. And we'll come to that in a moment. Particularly when we come to the last 2 lines in the meditation, where Buddha is saying we remove the greed for sensual pleasures, and one certainly wouldn't come to conceive in a womb. Buddha's clearly telling us certain things here, because he's pointing out how greed for sensual pleasures or attachment to sensuality, it results in the inferior state of existence. But if you remove the greed for sensual pleasures, then you remove being bound to inferior realms. And that means one attains to the fruit of non-return. Now, during the Vesak Dhamma session, I used this particular insight pathway. And it was in relation to heirs in Dhamma and how we abide in negligence, meaning if we abide in negligence, there's a great deal of delusion. Now, I bring it up here because one of the important things here is when we lose the right view, then what happens is we're happy to indulge in objects of defilement, this kiles vatu. So when we do the ignoble search, we search for things which are subject to aging, sickness, death, and defilement. If we are still very attached to objects of defilement, so food, particular people, particular material objects, then what this insight pathway says is that we like to indulge in unprofitable ideas. So that means we allow akusala, the unskilled things, to come back in. We entertain them, we indulge in them. So in the Karaniyametta Sutta, we clean that up. But if we're still attached to sensual things, we have greed for those sensual things, then we're prepared to entertain the unskilled states again. Now, if we're prepared to indulge in unskilled states, that means we give up the skilled state, so we relinquish profitable ideas. So we have cleaned for killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, all the verbal misconduct, all the mental misconduct. And yet, if we're still attached to sensual things, we allow them to come back in and we give up our skilled states. So that's when we become negligent. When we're negligent, that means delusion is pushing us towards this again, this recipe. And so it's really important to see that when we make this strong determination, even in step number 2, to be thoroughly upright, we can even make that throughout the meditation. Let me not backslide. Let me not allow what I purified to become misconduct again. And so that's how one is able to remove covetousness, that through the insight or wisdom pathway that Buddha has given us in this sutta meditation, that we actually get to this point and we go for it. We say, yes, let me remove the greed. I've seen it. I've seen it at step number 6. I've seen it at step number 9. Like, I want to be wise. And so the outcome is that it says one certainly would not come again to conceive in a womb. So that means we give up inferior realms of existence. Now, when we look at the Noble Eightfold Path, we fulfill this when we maintain the right view right here. That means we give up, we renunciate all the things that are unskilled, and we continue to have the non-ill will and the non-harm or non-cruelty in terms of why we're cultivating loving kindness. We're able to maintain the right speech that we cleaned and purified. We're able to maintain the right kind of action by body, speech, and mind. We have the right livelihood. And all throughout this meditation, we maintain right effort. Right effort is not just about cleaning what arises. It's also about making sure that it doesn't arise in terms of unskilled states. We don't let them re-enter. Guarding our sense faculties is one way. The other way is also with right effort, that if we have skilled states, we protect them. So if we've given up something, we protect that. We don't do anything that would, in our meditation, disrupt that. And we keep developing what is skillful. So we keep following the insight pathway. And right mindfulness is the one that keeps checking, am I on the right track? Is right view still the leader? Am I making sure wrong view doesn't re-enter? And so where we get to in the meditation is right concentration. So when we develop this, when we're training to learn this meditation, to do this meditation, it takes practice. So we can talk about the insight theoretically, and we can talk about all the different steps, but one has to apply oneself to remember the steps, to remember to go deeply with honesty into where we fall down, and to have a very strong intention that this is possible, that this is very possible what the Buddha is saying, that there are beings in the world who abide in this divine abode, who are able to purify by body, speech, and mind these things. So what we can do is to recognize that we have 10 skilled states. And what we can do now is, let me take you through a recap of the insight pathway. So I'm not going to go through the whole instruction from the Buddha. I'm just going to pull out and call out the 15 steps. And then what I'd like to do is for us to meditate on this together. And so I'll explain it again. So upright, you remember, we purify our physical actions and our verbal actions. So we make sure we don't kill, we don't steal, we don't have sexual misconduct on the physical level, because that does not go with loving kindness. On the verbal level, we make sure that we don't have lying, harsh speech, divisive speech, or even empty speech or frivolous speech. So we take our own example and we recognize this is not something that is possible if I want to develop metta. I wouldn't like that happening to me, to be directed at me. So let me give this up. Let me abandon it, wash it away. So when we do that, that makes us upright. So we have 7 skilled states. For thoroughly upright, we make a strong determination, knowing that we need to keep this virtue to do this meditation. We make a strong determination to maintain our virtue. And so that's step number 2. We come to step number 3, easy to instruct. So if you remember, we say, in order to be easy to instruct, we need to abandon derogation, envy, disparaging or divisiveness, and stinginess. So again, we take our own example and we remove those things. We say, this doesn't go with loving kindness if I'm doing these things. If I'm doing these things, then I have holes in my metta bucket. And so we remove the derogation, envy, disparaging, and also the stinginess. Then we come to gentle, and we said, In order to be gentle, we need to remove the harshness, the rudeness that we have by physical actions and also verbal actions. So again, we take an example of physical rudeness and verbal rudeness and recognize, how can we have loving kindness if we behave in this way, if we're rude and harsh? And so we abandon it. When we abandon it, wash it away and disapprove of it, then we're gentle. If we're gentle, then we look at being not arrogant. So that means we need to remove the arrogance. We ask ourselves, what are we arrogant about? We're arrogant about our youth, our good health, our looks, our appearance, our life, all the different components of our life. And then we remember, but if we're all subject to aging, sickness, and death, having been born, what is there to be arrogant about? We're brothers and sisters in birth, old age, sickness, and death. It can all be taken away from us. So that removes the arrogance and we become not arrogant. We become humble. If we're humble, then we recognize we need to control the sense faculties. So we don't go searching for things through the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind, because we remember there's danger, like the tortoise, the simile of the tortoise. Buddha says if we remain unguarded, we can be attacked. And attacked by what? We can be attacked by longing. If there's longing, then there's sadness. So the defilements come back in again. So we guard or control our sense faculties. And Buddha says if we control our sense faculties, we become prudent or wise. So if we're prudent, that means we are very careful where we roam with our sense faculties. We're very careful to maintain good conduct in this meditation. Then we come to courteous, not yearning to associate with families. So we said, in order to be courteous, we've already cleaned for our physical and verbal conduct. Now it's just the mental conduct. So we need to not lift ourselves to something we don't have. So we lift ourselves to a wealthy family or a prominent family or to someone who has higher attainments. We lift ourselves when we don't have these things, thinking, oh, those people are having more happiness than we are. But we need to remember those people also suffer. If they're born, they're subject to aging, sickness, and death. And so we come to not yearning to associate with families. If we recognize that yearning to associate with families is another hole in the metta bucket, that it prevents us from boundless metta, because we would think, me and my family, me and the people I like, me and the people that share my views, not anybody else who I dislike, who I don't prefer, who I'm biased against, who don't share my views. That's holes in the metta bucket. So with right view fulfilled, we recognize we're not to take anything as me and mine, because all it leads to is suffering. So if that's the case, if we have fulfilled right view, we've removed all those blocks and obstructions, then we wish, may all living beings be happy and well. May all beings be free from suffering. So there's no blocks, there's no preferences to this animal, not that animal, this family, not another family, not this group of politicians, not another group of politicians, nothing like that, not this country, not another country. So that's what it means to get to this point. And then Buddha asks us to spread that loving kindness in all directions to all living beings, that we understand when there's birth, when we spread to all the different living beings that the Buddha is highlighting in this part of the meditation, be they long, large, middle-sized, or what have you, he's reminding us, birth into any kind of existence, any size, any shape, seen or unseen, and so forth. It's also seeing that these are the kinds of beings that will pass away. And so when we realize that this is the spectrum of birth and death, then it opens up our meditation. And so what we come to is, if there's any remaining anger or ill will, the Buddha asks us to clean it. He says, remember that spectrum of death. If there's still anger, hostility towards anyone, really look at that. Do we fully understand the death-bound nature of all living beings, that they're impermanent? Why are we still holding on to anger if it's unlasting, this whole existence? Same with ill will in a different sense. If we still have ill will, the Buddha asks us, do we really understand about the aging nature? And so when we look at that, when we deeply look at that, then we remove the ill will. And so what we went through today is to have in our mind, with this purified physical, verbal, and mental conduct, just like the mother, that's how we wish. Not to me and mine. We have the right view. We wish to all living beings, to all directions, boundlessly, with the right view, without hostility, without any obstruction, without any hatred. And so we can do that in all postures. We get to the fact that if we don't take up any wrong views, if we maintain our right view, then we are virtuous. We remember we have 9 skilled states. If we have 9 skilled states, then we're missing one. And so what we were saying in this last part of what we discussed today, it's the greed for sensual pleasures. When we have greed for sensual pleasures, we want to take back the unskilled states. We want to give up our skilled states. So we don't want to do that. We see that the fleeting pleasure we thought we got from sensual pleasures, we remember it's not true. It leads back to this whole mass of suffering. It leads back to the inferior existence. And so we give up that greed for sensual pleasures. We give up the covetousness. And so we're not born into a mother's womb. So the main thing is, when we start the meditation, have a really noble intention that this meditation is very precious, that we know we need to give up unskilled states. And so let's have that noble aspiration. And when we do the steps, do as much as you can. So if you're skilled, do all the steps sequentially. If you're not so skilled, that's okay. Do as much as you can and get to the point where you can wish, may all beings be happy. So you can do that at even step number 7, because one is prudent. And then also at step number 10. But if you can, really try to do it to step number 15. And remember, once the everything is purified, so when you have the 10 skilled states at step number 15, spread it boundlessly, this loving kindness in all directions, and spread it as much as you can, like a mother to her only child. Have that boundlessly. And if it gets to the point in the meditation where the mind goes still, it feels like it's in the sphere of loving kindness, allow the mind to dwell in loving kindness, in that stillness. Abide there. Remember Brahma Mettang, the divine abiding. And notice that the mind is uplifted. And if you want to check, you can check. If you bring anyone to the mind that you've had difficulty with, you can check. You would find that it's very unsticky, that it just goes into this bucket of loving kindness, evaporates. And if you would like, you can also remember the noble ones, the ones who actually cultivate this, all the way up to the pure abodes. And if you like, you can also reflect on the Bodhisattva, who is coming to be the next Buddha, who is imbued with loving kindness. That is also very lovely. So let's do this meditation, and I will call us out when it's time to come out of the meditation. Allow the mind to really soak this in. Wishing you well. Blessings of the Triple Gem. Let's meditate. Blessings of the Triple Gem. We can come out of our meditation. We did a slightly longer meditation today because I think it's useful to do that together, and also just to practice what we've been through throughout a number of these sessions now. So we've now come to the end of the Karaniyametta Sutta. It's not the end of the Karaniyametta Sutta for us, because when we develop, which is what we'll start looking at next week, the first doorway to Nibbana, or painful practice with slow realization, this is the Dukkha Patipada Dandabhinya. So it's one of the modes of progress that is recommended by the Buddha. And what's really powerful about the next meditation is that it helps us to deepen what we've started in Karaniyametta Sutta, but helps to really look at Kapalinkara Hara, which is the physical nutriment, which basically refers to form, or the sensual things that we become very enamored with. For instance, it's very good to know the true nature of the body, the true nature of food. This is what falls under Kapalinkara Hara. So when we have greed for sensual pleasures, if we have a deeper understanding of the true nature of these things, then it becomes a lot easier to see why we are trapped by the First Noble Truth. We're trapped by that there's suffering. So what we said even during this Karaniyametta Sutta, that if one really understands the First Noble Truth, it makes it so much easier. It makes it so much easier in terms of when we start looking at this painful practice with slow realization, we get a deeper insight into why we seek existence in sensual realms. We also will use the Samadhi Bhava Sutta as part of the meditation. So it's good if you know about the Samadhi Bhavana Sutta, what we've touched on as that insight pathway, that recipe that Buddha gives us. It's very useful to know. And also, we'll really look at how we can connect the First Noble Truth of suffering and see that the depth of our understanding of that First Noble Truth is proportionate to how well, or how deep, how well we can cultivate loving kindness. So we see glimpses of that definitely with this meditation. Some will probably have that insight more than others, depending on what they've practiced before. So remember, Buddha said that if you see even one noble truth, you'll see them all. And I think that is what we want to be able to do, because once you see First Noble Truth of suffering, a lot of the rest of the Noble Truths, they just are seen. You actually see like the importance of the Noble Eightfold Path as the way out of suffering. You get a glimpse of Nibbana in this next meditation that we're doing very, very clearly. So we will also apply the Karaniyametta as part of that meditation. So what you've learned so far will be very, very helpful. So if you haven't done this first doorway to Nibbana before, there's videos available if you want to prep or just get an idea. But I will do an introduction next week. We will take this very slowly. So just like we've done with Karaniyametta, we're not going to rush through the insight pathway. We'll take it step by step. And one more thing to say is, if you have any questions about Karaniyametta Sutta, any of the steps, any concerns, write to me. Write to suttameditationseries@gmail.com. What I'll do is I can address some of those questions at the next session. I have to admit, I'm not that good at doing too many things at once. So having the chat on while we're running these sessions, it would just be a bit of a mess for me. So I haven't done it. But I'm open to receiving questions and being able to answer them. So I can do that also at the start of the next session. So we can now pay our gratitude and respect to the Buddha for this wonderful teachings and all the different teachings that we've used to get to this point of our meditation. Our gratitude to the Noble Ones for helping us with this Dhamma. Gratitude to any teachers or good friends who encourage us on the path, help us on the path. And we can share the merit with all sentient beings. May all beings be happy and well. May all beings be free from suffering. Wishing you all well, wishing you to continue to grow in wholesome qualities. And if you'd like to continue with these slow sessions, I'll see you next week. Same time, same place. Blessings of the Triple Gem. Wishing you well. Te Rowan Saranai.